about 8 attendees. I know that there were a number of people on planning to come to the Facebook Live event as well that I don't see on the attendees, so that's good. Just for a heads up, I mean, there's usually a delay between what happens on Zoom and what goes live on Facebook, so if you're somehow seeing both or listening to both, they won't always match up the same. But I'm Jacob Poindexter. I am the Secretary of Logistics for the Anchorage Tenants Union. We don't have a lot of logistics yet, so I'm still getting there. We're all a new group in Anchorage, or relatively new. So this has been good. I do want to remind everybody to drop in the chat, to just drop your name or however you would like to be referred to, and acknowledge like where you live, what neighborhood in Anchorage, or what city you live in if you're not a resident of Anchorage. So there will be some time at the end of this for people, the attendees, to ask questions directly to the panelists. So we'll get there. But if there are questions that you have in the meantime, feel free to drop those in the chat as well. And we'll try to be watching both the messages that come over the chat in Zoom, and also if there are any questions and messages that come over the Facebook Live broadcast. And just for your own information, we are recording this event, and obviously it's going over Facebook Live, so it is public. And later it will be posted on the YouTube channel as well. So just so everybody knows that. And finally, before we get started, we're going to have Natsuki's going to introduce the panelists here in just a second. But we also want to acknowledge that that we recognize that we work and live on the unceded land of the Dena'ina people who have stewarded this land for thousands of years. And all of us, including if you don't live in Anchorage, find out where you live, more about where you live. And all of us work, live, and organize, must remember the realities and violence that have occurred where we live, and in all of that work, consistently work towards decolonization. So Natsuki, let's get started with introductions.
Awesome, thank you, Jacob. Okay, so just to give everyone an overview, like Jacob said, there'll be time to ask questions at the end, but feel free to use the Q&A box. And the tenant unions that we have represented today, so we're the Anchorage Tenants Union. We've invited the Los Angeles Tenants Union, Sacramento Tenants Union, San Diego, and the Tenants and Neighborhood Councils, which is based in the Bay Area. So we will just have you guys start by maybe talking for a little bit, about 5 minutes, about a brief overview of each of your unions and kind of what the current situation is in terms of the housing and tenants protections under COVID, and then what you guys are focusing on now and what you, in terms of your demands. So we will go ahead and start with Elizabeth Blaney from Los Angeles Tenants Union. Elizabeth is a founding member of the LA Tenants Union and is an organizer with the Union de Vecinos in the Eastside local of the union, and she is also part of the union-wide Solidarity Casework Committee. All right, so we'll hand it off to Elizabeth.
Hello, hi everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate. I'm excited to be here and listen to what you all are doing in different parts. I know some of you from the Autonomous Tenant Union Network, so it's good to see some of you again. So yes, my name is Elizabeth Blaney, and I am with the LA Tenants Union. We were founded in 2015, but basically as a result of a long history of doing organizing around housing issues for 20 years before that, especially on the east side. You know, with Union de Vecinos, we formed the first tenant union on the east side of LA, and then through working in collaboration with others and doing several studies with a range of different groups of people in different neighborhoods, and And then we all came together and formed the LA Tenants Union. We have 13 chapters right now with over 1,000 dues paying members. And we are organized by chapters or locals, and then within each local we have building associations, neighborhood committees, tenant associations, all the similar kind of thing, but very geographic. We are also organized, we don't see ourselves as a housing movement, but more about the tenant is the subject, and so whatever needs could come around with that. Housing, of course, is one big, huge one, but we've also done some work on environmental issues, some health issues. Basically, the tenant associations and the neighborhood committees identify what those are. So with respect to the current situation in LA, we have a rent strike. We began our rent strike on April 1st. The demands of our rent strike are to cancel the rents. We have a really big action coming up on April 30th. We decided to do it a day before the May Day action simply because May 1st is when the rent is due, and so we're letting landlords know that we won't be paying the rent again for this May or for this month. Basically, in terms of some of the protections that we have here for the state of California, is our court system ruled that for 3 months after, whenever the governor lifts all of the executive orders, there can be no evictions, any kind of eviction, not just for non-payment of rent, but you're a nuisance or you break your lease for whatever reason, the courts will not issue a summons or an unlawful detainer order for 3 months. So basically we won't see any evictions actually start to roll in at the earliest until towards the end of August. So it gives people and us this opportunity to really do some organizing and do some breathing room. When, we expect the landlords will start preparing their cases. So, as soon as, September 1st comes, everybody's going to try and get their evictions in there and start serving those. But what is going to happen if you didn't pay as a result of COVID, you are going to be able to have the opportunity, you have as a defense the fact that you didn't pay. That is now a defense in trial. But in addition to that, you'll have the opportunity to do a repayment of your back rent for 12 months. Now that's still sucky because who can pay back a $6,000 debt of 3 months of rent, in addition to what your regular rent is. So, but at least it kind of delays and just postpones evictions. It unfortunately sets up people after 6 months, I can't make this payment anymore, and then they could evict it. So that's why we're really pushing hard on the rent cancellation. But that's kind of the basic situation going on here in LA.
Awesome. Thank you, Elizabeth. Now we'll go on to Erica. Erica is with the Sacramento Tenants Union, and Erica is a renter born and raised in Sacramento.
Hi, I don't know if everyone can, everyone can see me. So my name is Erica. I'm with the Sacramento Tenants Union, and Sacramento Tenants Union is probably about 3 years, 2.5, 3 years old. I started about 1.5 years ago with them in 2018, almost 2 years now, actually. And it started because my dog. It started to form because of the fact that rent prices were increasing. Our mayor has been prioritizing luxury built houses. Our city council members all own some property in some manner if they're not investing in it. And I've been a renter. I was born and raised here in Sacramento. And we've been really focused on public housing and preserving the public housing that we do have here in Sacramento. It's in really, really bad conditions right now. They've not been prioritized and they've not been kept up intentionally so that federal money can keep funneling in, because there is this idea that if they don't pass their inspections, they don't get any more money, which is actually not true. Sometimes they'll get more money, so because they'll make a case for needing more of that money in order to repair it, but that money is actually not going into the public housing that we have here. So that's been kind of like one of our long-term goals, which has been really hard to kind of organize public housing tenants. Yeah, and today we did a car action here in Sacramento. We have about like, I want to say 5+ grassroots organizations that all partner together. And we went down past the Sacramento County Jail, the ICE detention center, going into the neighborhoods, past city council, past the Capitol. It was just like a mile-long caravan of folks making demands. So and I appreciate you guys inviting us to be on this panel.
Awesome. Thank you, Erica. We'll go on to Wolfgang from the Tenant Neighborhood Council in the Bay Area. Wolfgang is a renter in Oakland, California, and has been a tanc member since it was founded.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This is a really cool little event. So my name is Wolfgang. I was born and raised in the East Bay. I'm a renter now in Oakland. I was part of the founding of tanc, or I came to the first meeting, I guess, and I've been coming ever since. It wasn't my idea. It sort of developed out of people in the East Bay DSA. So it's not an official part of the East Bay DSA, but it has a lot of overlap with East Bay DSA. The idea of tanc is that group of us basically felt that a lot of housing organizing happening is ends up being like funneled into nonprofit work and things like that, or it ends up addressing the problem of you know, the rental, the landlord renter relationship at levels that are not at that level. So it addresses problems like at state level and at you know, in terms of like local elections and things like that. And we support all the kind of efforts to get things like rent control, but the main focus of tanc is to apply pressure through organization at the level of renter and landlord. So at the point where those two forces meet, we feel like we have to be organized. We know landlords are very organized, especially in California. Landlords are extremely effective. They have their own organizations, and they can you know, mobilize their organizations to pressure for the things they want. So the goal of tanc is to create what we call councils and to facilitate the creation of councils. We have right now about 250 dues paying members, I believe, which is a huge increase from like a month ago when we had maybe like 25, I think. We then have like another 250 people who are involved in organizing in some way. And we've got, I think, about 100 different councils now, which are basically these collections of renters who have the same landlord. So a primary function of tanc is that we can do research to figure out who has the same landlord. Because oftentimes landlords, you know, might represent themselves a certain way. You might think, well, it's just a small, you know, neighborhood landlord. I'm just his only tenant. It turns out he owns like, you know, 20 different houses all across the East Bay. So we do research to figure that stuff out. And we try to put tenants in contact with each other and get them to all come together and address their problems directly at that point of the conflict between their landlord and the people who have to pay money to them for their rent. So that's the main thing we do. It's been like extremely, you know, sort of cool and hectic the way that, and unfortunately, this whole coronavirus situation has created so much stress around rent and getting rent paid. So we have a lot of members who did not pay April rent. We have a lot more who are not going to pay May rent. And we're trying to best figure out how to use tanc as a weapon to get the things we want in this situation. So we really do feel like the kind of as much as we can create like pressure and create a movement around housing, that's our goal as tanc, I think. Yeah. So I think that basically sums it up.
So thanks so much, Wolfgang. And that's awesome that you've seen such an increase in the last couple of weeks here. Yeah. Okay, we will go to Rafael. I think Rafael's on the line here from San Diego Tenants Union. Did you make it onto our?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Rafael. Sorry.
Oh, Kathy, go ahead. I guess I'm here with Kathy from Tenants Union.
Yeah, there's Rafael Bautista and myself, Kat Mendonça from the San Diego Tenants Union. I'm sure that he can probably fill in a lot more, but echoing what Oakland and other tenants union throughout California have said, that there is, you know, a halt on evictions, but debt will be accrued. So obviously the demand to Newsom is to cancel and basically for rent forgiveness, to cancel the rent. One specific obstacle that we're facing in San Diego is the amount of unhoused people due to no rent controlled ordinance and the huge push for building affordable housing, which equates to gentrification in our neighborhoods. It's very much ruled by developer interest, a lot of nonprofits. They see the value in building more houses, but it doesn't guarantee that they're going to be affordable. And so that's pretty much what we're trying to fight against, because there's a lot of developer interest in city council, and we often get silenced. I think we've learned firsthand of what kind of union busting is really going on in San Diego. I don't know what else you want to add, Rafael.
Yeah, well, we've been organizing here in San Diego with ACE and DSA San Diego. We're pushing for the rent strike, and we're pushing our base, to be part of the rent strike, to be in solidarity with the rent strike. Fortunately, we have the moratorium. We have a few moratoriums here in San Diego, but even though they got their limits and people are still going to be paying rent back, they can't be evicted right now. So we're really trying to let tenants know what their rights are, what their protections are. We're keeping them informed in different ways, but we're also building a network to be able to respond in case we don't win the campaign to cancel rent. So the strike is a movement to get the rents canceled, and locally we're doing it, but we're also pushing it so that it happens building by building in case we don't get it at the state level.
Okay, awesome, San Diego. Okay, and then we'll finish off with Michael Patterson, who is our co-chair of the Anchorage Tenants Union here.
Hey everyone, and I'm super excited that this is happening because I think it's really fantastic to have, West Coast and Alaska unions kind of get together and sort of like show folks that, not only is this like a local problem, but this is also, a regional and national problem as well. So everyone else has these like long histories. The Anchorage Tenants Union, we just started meeting. I think our first meeting was back in either like late January or like early February. I'm pretty sure it was January. And so we had just been discussing how do we want to actually organize ourselves, what's our mission, what's our goal. And then we had this idea for our first event was going to be on April 5th. And then bam, COVID-19 happened. And then we were just like, okay, so I guess that means we have to kind of accelerate everything. And like, what does that mean for tenants here in Anchorage? And so what we kind of came to the conclusion was that, a lot of folks are scared that they're going to get evicted because probably within middle of March, late March, here in Anchorage, they basically let all restaurant workers go, all kind of low wage tip earners got ordered to stay away. And so our biggest concern was like trying to take all this different information from like the federal level, the state level, the city level, and sort of try to condense it all to make it easier for folks to understand, what everything actually means. So like before the state actually enacted an eviction moratorium that lasts till July 1st, the Third Judicial Court, which covers, I think, only a certain parts of Alaska, said that they were going to not process any new eviction orders, and all eviction orders are going to be placed on halt, which gave folks like a slight reprieve. But this was, I think, March, and it was going to be revisited probably 2 weeks later. So there was no real like long-term stability for folks. And so fortunately, our state legislature and our governor did pass into law a moratorium and eviction moratorium that lasts until about, I think it's the end of June. But the issue that we particularly have with it is that it specifically says that tenants are liable for any back rent that's owed. And so, you know, here in Alaska, our economy is very based on resource extraction, so like oil, fishing, and tourism. And so the cruise ships are not going to come up here this summer. Oil is like negative, it's worth negative amount of money. And so our economy is kind of shot. And so it doesn't really help folks, you know, 2 or 3 months down the road where you owe, you know, $3,000 to $4,000. It took you a while to get your unemployment, if you even get unemployment in the first place, and then now you owe all this money. So, you know, that's kind of where we're at in terms of the things we're trying to organize around. And we are trying to organize a rent strike here. It has been a lot more difficult because I think we are a newer organization and we are trying to build up this trust within the community. And so there's kind of this like double-edged sword that we're dealing with right now, is trying to get more members, but also get ourselves out there to let the community know that we are here, but at the same time adhering to like social distancing rules and making sure that we're keeping people safe. So I think this last Saturday, we just actually had a car protest for the cancellation of rents, and you know, it was pretty modest, but you know, nothing like that else has been happening here. So, you know, in terms of where Anchorage Tenants Union is and where we want to go, you know, we're just in that beginning phase where it's going to take one tenant at a time with one issue at a time and building that trust. And then, you know, hopefully eventually, you know, we can be like some of these other tenants unions where, you know, we have a longer history and we have that trust in those communities. And yeah, I just want to say I'm really happy that everyone's here. I think it's pretty awesome.
Cool, thank you. So this can be for anyone who wants to take it on the panel, but like, how have you been organizing during this time of social distancing? How have you been dealing with that?
We have like a stack, or how are we saying?
Hop in there.
I can just say one thing that tanc has been doing that I think has been really great is we have a lot of posters and flyers, and we have a truck parked out by one of the organizers' houses, and we invite all our members to come to that truck, and they can open it and get the flyers and posters, and then there's like a hand sanitizer set up there, and then they can go take those and distribute them around. So it's a way to like not have any contact, but to be able to distribute posters and flyers to people who want to flyer them all around the city. And so we've got a ton of posters up. I've been seeing them all around town, and it's I think it's quite effective way to get the word out.
Yeah, and I'll just say for Anchorage, we also have done the flyering. We're not quite sure how effective it has been, just because it's kind of more like a shotgun approach. You're just trying to like basically get the information out as quickly as you can in the largest area possible. We also done like we've done like a radio interview, and then we have met with some legislative staff, trying to sort of gauge where the Alaska State Legislature is in terms of trying to get like a debt forgiveness program and cancellation of rent and what that kind of looks like. But I think, as everyone else from the Anchorage Tenants Union can attest to, it's been pretty difficult trying to come up with alternative means of like organizing without the ability to like get in groups with one another.
I think Elizabeth from LA wants to hop in.
Yeah, so for us, we've been doing multiple different things. So, you know, a lot of our chapters have meetings at least twice a month, sometimes weekly. And so those meetings have been moved to Zoom. But some chapters, especially like our chapter, I mean, we deal with a lot of low-income families who either have a landline, so they don't have a cell phone, or they have a cell phone that's not a smartphone. They just don't have access to the Zoom app. So we've been offering, we're still having meetings at our office for those people who cannot just connect online. And so we have a group of people who will be there, and, you know, we sit 6 feet apart with masks, and then we project the video onto the screen so that all the other, 50 or so members of our chapter who do have access, so that we're still able to make sure that everybody is not discriminated against just because of either not having the tech to be able to do so. We also have set up some mutual aid networks within various chapters. We are still doing some meetings in some homes. And it's basically just for people who are like very, very desperate and there's no other way to connect. And so we want to make sure that we are not excluding people. We have chapters who are doing outreach to the unhoused, providing food, working with them for their spaces and working with their needs. So there's still some of that, all, using some of the social distance practices. We're still organizing a lot of protests and actions. You can participate in person on sidewalks where we go up the night before. We measure everything, so everybody shows up and we're like, find your X. You stand on your X with your sign and your mask and leave people in chance. Or if you don't feel comfortable, then we have all the car caravans, like some of you have talked about, and get cars really decorated up. And then for those who don't feel like coming out or don't feel comfortable coming out, people are making signs and putting it in the windows of their buildings, doing a lot of social media stuff, doing some video stories, so that there's just multiple different ways of avenues for people can still engage. We have letters, sample letters on our website, so that people can still have access, download those letters to notify their landlords, hey, I'm not paying my rent this month. I'm impacted by COVID. I'm not going to do that, because we want to make sure everybody's documenting and notifying the landlords. And then with a representative that they're connected to in one of their chapters, so that we're getting more and more people coming in. One of the things, that some people were kind of like in a situation, some of the tenants were like, well, I can't pay, but I don't know if I want to go on strike. And so we really use that as an organizing opportunity. Well, if you can't pay, you are on strike. So to be in this position of, I can't pay, and just be this individual and not pay it, or I can't pay, so I'm joining the strike to demand rent cancellation, and I got a whole group of people, at least in my building, maybe even in my neighborhood, who's going to work together. So really kind of showing people to kind of get over this, well, yeah, I can't pay, but I'm not going to go on strike. And it's like, what do you benefit by making that statement, by taking that action of not paying, but then saying you're not on strike? So, there were some people who kind of fell in that, but then, with some education and dialogue and discussion, we're able to move people, oh yeah, of course we can. And so, but yes, I think like many of you have expressed, we're getting lots of calls. And so we're really trying to make sure that we're using this as a moment for organizing and not mobilizing. Like, we just want, oh great, you're calling, come to the action. Because then what happens when we're all back at work and people are starting to get a little bit of income again, then they go away and we've missed an opportunity. So we're really trying to get people staying active, having roles, having responsibilities, so that as we're moving out of this, which is going to be a very long time, we're building up the infrastructure and keeping people in the movement. Because the way we're looking at it is there's going to be whole new normality that comes out of this in ways that housing is addressed. Our housing now is really the center of everything. It has become the hospital because you're caring for sick people. It's become the church because you're not allowed to go out to mass or your service. It's become the school because we're here educating our kids. It's become the workplace. It is the stability, and it is the rock of everything now that we're having to do. And so really kind of looking at that perspective and seeing how we're going to use these as moments for alternative ways of developing the kind of housing that we need when we come out of this.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for really hitting on why this moment is so unique and there's so many different factors that need to be considered. Does anyone else want to talk about kind of how this is unique, and especially if you've been organizing for a while, how this moment's kind of different and why you might be calling for a rent strike, even for those people who wouldn't want to call it a rent strike? Does anyone else want to talk on that and how they're organizing?
Well, I'll just, this is Erica from the Sacramento Tenants Union. I'll just speak on, like, you know, some of the success that we've seen recently has really been in connecting with like other grassroots organizations, because housing, it intersects so many aspects of like the issues that are happening right now, you know, with prisoners being super vulnerable to getting contact with this because of the fact that our jails are not kept in good sanitary conditions, let alone them keeping people in there for an unnecessary amount of time for things that aren't even convictions. And so housing just is the intersection of a lot of the issues that we're experiencing with debt. And so leveraging all those different grassroots organizations to come together and work on putting out like media kits, putting out various things that people can use from home has been a great success, especially if you're a small tenants union. It might be a tool to look at other organizations that are in the area, or if you're in a small town.
Erica, do you mind saying a little bit more about what alliances you have built? Because I know navigating those can be kind of tricky sometimes, especially with like nonprofits and
yeah. So here in
developers.
Sacramento, we have the Anti-Police Terror Project, and so they started out of Oakland. And we have NorCal Resist. They're helping finance undocumented immigrants who obviously don't have any source of income right now and have to shelter at home. And so they're really at risk right now for just completely being like evicted or kicked out of their housing, especially with it being hard to track where they're living at and them getting access to know what their rights are in housing. So we're partnering with those organizations along with Decarcerate Sacramento. And DSA Sacramento is another one. We have another one that formed recently, and it's a large group of basically everyday community members, but some from the medical field, some from some of the UC Davis medical students, and they all came together and formed an organization called SAC-SOUP, so Sacramento Solidarity of Unhoused People. And the Sacramento Homeless Union is another one that's part of, so it's just like a big network of really grassroots organizations that, I mean, we at least have connections to 30 people plus amongst our each individual organization. So if we're all coming together, we're really tapping into a lot of people.
Does any other panelists want to talk about what coalitions or alliances they formed either in this moment or building up to this moment that has really been clutch?
Yeah, I can add something. This is Rafael again with San Diego Tenants Union. I think one of the things that we're, obviously using Zoom a lot, but one of the things that we're trying to do is really get in front of the media, get as many people aware about the rent strike, about the demand for rent cancellation, getting people the toolkit that they need to be able to provide the landlord and know the steps to take to be able to use the eviction moratorium the proper way. But then it's also allowing us to build and, trying to address some of the contradictions. So a lot of the nonprofits are now being put in a position where, though not endorsing the rent strike directly, they're now being forced to let people know that there's an actual moratorium on evictions. So they're sending emails out to their memberships, letting them know about the Cancel the Rent campaign, letting people know about the moratorium on evictions. And we're talking about organizations like Mid-City Can, which is, one of our larger organizations, larger nonprofits. But we're also making connections with, like I said, DSA San Diego and other organizations that are allowing us to push the rent strike. Earlier, we had a panel presentation with the May 1st coalition. So we're going to be active during May 1st. We're going to have a caravan route aside from the May 1st group, but we're also going to be meeting at certain places. And, you know, these are all things that we're trying to do, connecting with groups locally and also organizing without being in the same space at the same time.
Awesome. Wolfgang, do you want to hop in?
I was unmuted. Yeah, thanks. With regards to the question about forming, you know, alliance with other groups and things like that, I think one of tanc's, one of our ideas for a while, I forgot to mention we've been around for maybe I think about 2 years or 2.5 years. One of our orientations from the beginning was to kind of always be open to things that happen in our city that kind of join up with them and support them however we can. So the Oakland teachers strike was a big thing that happened fairly recently that we were pretty heavily involved in. So we kind of see the importance of like keeping our organizations going and active even when there's a lull in things, and then, you know, forming alliances and doing other things when like, let's say tenant organizing isn't really popping off at the moment. So like back when the Oakland teachers strike was happening, we were kind of felt we'd hit a little bit of a roadblock in tenant organizing. So we focused a lot on that. And so as a result, now we have, there's Oakland teachers and there's they have organizations that are coming and doing tenant organizing with us. Because I think we built those relationships. So I think it's just important, I guess the takeaway from that is like, you know, there's going to be like moments like this where coronavirus means that all of a sudden you have like, you know, hundreds of people who can't pay rent and you need to build and act quickly to mobilize in response to that. But then there's also going to be moments, there's going to be other times when things will be slow again. Like, yeah, people will go back to work. Who knows what will happen after this though? I mean, it might be really different, but in the past, basically, there were times when things were slow. But I think keeping things running at a certain level was important then. Yeah.
Wolfgang, can you talk a little bit more about how you managed to engage and plug in people when you got such a bump in numbers all of a sudden? Like, how did you really translate that into a functional organizing?
Yeah. It was like quite fortuitous that we had been going through a lot of sort of organizational reflection like right prior to this, and we kind of like we got our like constitution finally like drafted and finished basically like I think about a month before any of this started. We had people in all the different like spots. We have like a membership coordinator, an organizing community coordinator, outreach coordinator, finance coordinator that we all sort of had in place, and those were all really helpful. And so we have like an intake process now where we have people who are text banking and phone banking. We have people who had always been doing like door-to-door kind of work. So like I've done a lot of that. I've done a lot of like going and knocking on doors of tenants in specific tenant councils. Up until about a month ago, we had maybe 3 or 4 different tenant councils that were going kind of at a certain pace in the city that would have roles and have peaks and valleys kind of. And so we had organizers who were experienced in just kind of practicing that organizing process, even if we were not like making a ton of headway initially. So we had a good core of people who were like pretty comfortable doing things like phone banking, text banking, door knocking. We had the whole like online infrastructure setup of having like a whole spreadsheet system. And we had a whole like propaganda ministry or whatever. It's just people who are like have a print shop and are able to print things and get posters out and get flyers out and things like that. So I think it was really good that we like had that down. That was kind of core fundamental things you need to like to be able to grow in size when this all happened, because now I think we were handling it fairly well. Like we have a lot of people who are volunteering. It's all volunteer run, right? So it was a lot of people volunteering, helping with things like intake and outreach, and I think it's been really productive. Yeah.
Is anyone else? Oh, sorry. Did I cut someone off?
Well, this is Erica from the Tenants Union. I wanted to add to that something that we did maybe a week ago was because we saw the need from a lot of like new people, like when we started to do a Zoom thing about just the different laws or ordinances that were taking place in Sacramento in terms of like people not having to pay the rent, but they would have to notify their landlords. We saw that a lot of people were very interested in knowing how to organize their neighborhoods. And so we then did another training on like educating folks on how to do organizing, especially with, you know, social distancing at play, and like people very concerned and wanting to like respect that maybe talking to their neighbors was going to look different than knocking on people's doors. And so educating people on like how to do that, you know, writing their neighbors letters and then giving them an email or something that they can contact. So that seemed to be very effective in getting new people engaged.
Well, can I add one more thing also? Yeah, so that reminded me totally, like trainings and things has been really important. We've been doing trainings for organizers. Also, what we've been doing that's been really helpful is we've been having organizer office hours. So we have like a general assembly, and we notice it, like we have all these tenants who have specific issues that they have about like, what do I do in this specific situation? We can't address those all like on Zoom in a general assembly. So we have twice a week these organizer office hours where we have like more experienced organizers who will come and volunteer and do like one-on-one or like 1-on-5 in a lot of different little breakout groups to let people kind of talk through all their issues they have about their specific situations. And that's been really helpful, I think. That's it.
Elizabeth, do you want to talk a little bit more about how you are organizing people versus mobilizing them to kind of like make sure you're not doing something so transactional, or kind of how you're keeping people in a deeper way?
Yeah, so, you know, part of what we're doing, so for example, you know, as we get people calling in or sending us copies of the letters that they sent to their landlord, so then we follow up with them, and then we talk to them more in a dialogue around what's going on with their specific housing, and then what's going on in their building, and are there others? And so then getting kind of contacts that way of other people. Yeah, my neighbor's doing this, or my other neighbor's not so sure about it. Okay, well, how can we reach out? Or hey, why don't we set up a quick phone conversation amongst all of us? So starting with that one person in the building and then getting others to join, you know, maybe like the next day or a couple days from then, and then having a larger phone conversation and turning it to more into of a type of dialogue, and not just like, we're here giving you the information, now they've taken the information, now they're, you know, they're like, off, thank you very much. It's more, okay, so what do you want to do as a building? What is the priority? Priority is not being able to pay your rent. How are you going? What is the landlord's response? Okay, let's see what you can do collectively in talking to the landlord and getting them to back off. Or in some cases, landlords are like cool with it. We've seen a whole range, but it's really about having that constant contact, that constant follow-up, having conversations as a group, as many as you can together, and then getting them to do an action together. And that can be a very small step, as just something as letting others know about an upcoming general-wide action, to organizing something in their building, where some buildings have organized some mutual aid support for the 10 units that are in their building. Others have put up banners together and done something, but really trying to get them to work together in some type of action, so that they could see that this is something that they have control over, they can act on. And then as we're moving forward, having conversations with them about, well, what other things are kind of going on in your building? Is it repairs? What other needs do you have? How is COVID impacting you and your family? But it's really about being very consistent and regular in the contact, trying to do as much of it you can as a group, and then having people reflect on what they're doing and then taking some type of action. So that when things start to, when people start to come back to work, that they already have a structure built where we're going to continue to keep working on other issues that are going to come up throughout this process.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, we are starting to get some questions in from the audience. So one question from Will is, how have you engaged low-income communities? This can be for anyone. And Will said, as a former canvasser, I noticed that mostly middle class and upper class people who are willing to mobilize. So anyone can answer that.
I mean, so since Anchorage Tenants Union we're definitely more new to organizing tenants, I'll kind of speak on like personal experience when it sort of comes to that middle class folks have more, it's like more of a privilege for them to be able to engage in activism and mobilization because, you know, as the saying goes, time is money, you know, and so the more money you have, the more time you have. And I think when trying to organize in other areas, you know, besides like housing, you know, if you're going to go to like working class folks or working poor folks, you know, time is money, and you know they're going to want to have some sort of like what is in it for me, which I don't really think is a selfish position to have because they don't really have time, you know, on top of having kids, if they have kids, on top of working 1 or 2 jobs that aren't paying them enough, you know, their priorities are going to be, you know, I need to make ends meet, I need to keep my lights on, you know, I need to keep my kids going to school, versus somebody who's more of a middle class orientation, you know, they're going to have that luxury of being able to be like, well, yeah, you know, I will support this. I will go out and mobilize. And that's not to say that's necessarily bad. I just think in my personal experience, it just means you kind of have to approach those different groups a little differently.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Rafael.
Yeah, for us, you know, mainly that's our base. You know, currently, those are the most affected people, and those are the people we're trying to protect. So, you know, most of their situations are going to be that they cannot pay the rent, and just like the slogan says, you know, we're going to choose food over rent. You know, we want to make sure people are going to be able to survive and not pay, you know, for other people's profits. So that's the approach we take, letting people know what their rights are, and you know, really welcoming them, letting them know that there's protections, but there's also a tenants union that's there to support them.
Yeah, for us as well, you know, our primary base are low-income families, and they have had a very long history of organizing in the neighborhoods in which we have chapters. It's more now as a result of this that we're seeing more middle-class tenants come into it, because now they're impacted by something because they've lost their job, where low-income families have been in struggle and in crisis for a very long time. We've already had this pandemic of housing way before the COVID pandemic ever hit. And that's really who has been leading the way in a lot of the victories and changes that we have been able to make over the last couple of years. So for us, making sure, because of the disconnect in access to technology, we are making an even more concerted effort to maintain in contact with them, because before COVID, it was door knocking, house meetings, buildings in the alleys, meetings where people were at. And now that has been a little bit limited or restricted because of social distancing, it's really been about prioritizing how we maintain that access, because we know a lot of the middle class tenants, they can get into Zoom and have access to the tech and get assistance in a different kind of way, in a quicker way, than a lot of our low income tenants. So that is why we're still offering space for people to come into the office if need be. I mean, we consider ourselves essential workers because this is housing, and if you lose that, you've got nowhere else to go. And so really lots of phone calling, lots of following up, lots of responding right away, even teaching people, you know, who do have some of our low-income families who do have smartphones, how to use the app so they can be connected. But it is really giving a prioritization in our outreach efforts. You know, we were out today at Home Depot and U-Haul and other centers doing outreach to day laborers who are really struggling as a result of this. And so it's still going out there and making sure that we're just one-on-one with folks right now.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to combine kind of 2 questions on this next one. Are you, in your organizing, are you focusing on a state or federal level in terms of your targets, or are you focusing on a city or maybe even just tenant, like building landlord specific? What's kind of your strategy in terms of organizing for rent cancellation or debt forgiveness? And then the second part of that question is, are you finding that landlords or elected leaders are, some have been compassionate in these circumstances that are kind of so wild right now? So again, anyone can answer either part of those.
We haven't seen much compassion. In fact, we've seen stories where landlords are waiving rents, but only for like business owners. So they're waiving rent on businesses. And, you know, there's been scattered stories about landlords waiving rents on tenants, but I think that's been like maybe New York. I don't remember seeing anything here locally. The push we're making is at the city level and at the state level. At the city level, I think, you know, other than modifying the moratorium so where it's more effective and not, you know, placing all the burden on the tenant, we think that there's been possibly a way to make it so that this debt isn't collectible through an unlawful detainer. So that way people can avoid being displaced, and then I guess they're allowing people to maybe take care of it through small claims, which, you know, is something, and we don't quite support it. We need cancellation of rent, but it's something that a city might be able to do.
Wolfgang,
Well,
do you want to? Oh, sorry. We'll let Wolfgang and then whoever is after that.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to address that. Yeah, the question of like what is our orientation and what is our strategy. From the beginning, tanc's orientation has always been towards building our power at the level of the tenant and at the level of each specific landlord. So the councils we organize are specifically designed in that way, in that we constitute each council around a specific landlord and try to organize as many tenants of that landlord as possible to apply that pressure. We kind of see it like the way a union works. You know, if you had a bunch of workers in a workplace, I think it'd be pretty clear that like it would not be that effective for them to all like go to try to you know, to the federal government or go to the state government and try to get them to do things for them if you want to win things in the workplace. So we kind of see those wins and those victories like something like getting rent control. We see those victories as sort of the things that come after we've developed like tenant power and working class power in the sites of the workplace and in the sites of the tenant and landlord relationships. We kind of feel like those are the things that will result as concessions from the development of like on the ground like mobilizations and tenant power in conflicts with landlords. Yeah.
Sorry, whoever I cut off, you can go ahead.
This is Erica from the Sacramento Tenants Union. I just wanted to add for us, I think we all feel a sense of duty, you know, that we're close to the Capitol, we're close to like where the laws and where our assembly members are. You know, we feel pretty dutiful in that sense to be taking action here and doing it is a statewide approach, you know, with all the tenants unions and with all the tenants across California in mind, in anything that we're doing. So in terms of like attacking like federal or state, we definitely go after state stuff as much as possible.
Okay, Michael?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I can, for the Anchorage Tenants Union, because Alaska is a pretty unique place in terms of when it comes to, you know, the local government. We don't have counties here, we have boroughs and like municipalities in the state. Because the boroughs and the municipalities and localities are so dependent on the state, that if we were going to get some sort of reprieve in terms of like the rent moratorium or the eviction moratorium came from the state level. You know, there were some things from the judicial side, which is also on the state level. And because Alaska's economy and our state government is heavily reliant on the federal government, a lot of the times when you talk to a local politician or elected official, you know, the kind of runaround answer that you'll get here is like, well, we have to wait for Congress, which is like the most demoralizing thing I think anyone can hear right now in the country is, you know, let's hope Congress works together and we can find a solution through the federal government. So, you know, that's for us, I think, is sort of like when we talk about focusing on all these things, we want to build the Anchorage Tenants Union really from like the bottom up in terms of like empowering tenants where they're at. And where they're at is really going to depend on how they interact with the different levels of government. But overall, I think the Anchorage Tenants Union is going to mostly focus on like the municipality and like the state government, because that's what's going to really sort of, when we do start getting victories, that's where it's going to be at. And then kind of to the other question about landlords and elected leaders being more compassionate, not so much with the landlords, but I will say that I have been surprised by some of the elected officials that I've talked to. They do seem to be becoming more like, I wouldn't say like they're being situationally radical. They're like, yes, we should, you know, forgive all debts for rent and housing. And that is something that in the past, I never would have thought I would hear some of these politicians say. But, you know, Alaska's a unique place when it comes to stuff like that.
I think for us as LA Tenants Union, our target has been the mayor and the city, and then within larger coalitions that we are working with, then on a state level is the governor. With respect to the type of landlord response, we've seen a range. You know, some landlords are like, okay, you know, don't worry about it, where others have served 3-day notices, where others have actually gone online, filled out the paperwork for the summons and printed it out and delivered it themselves. So it still hasn't been registered with the court yet, but they're saying, you're evicted, here it is. And so tenants are showing up with some attorneys like, look, I got an eviction notice. And it's a false one because it hasn't been filed and stamped with the court. So you see a lot of those kind of tactics and pressure still going on. And then we've seen just a sector of no response, because I say a lot of landlords don't know what to do right now because they're just tied. Their hands are tied on a lot of levels. It's very interesting that you mentioned in San Diego that you guys were able to get the debt reclassified to consumer debt so that it wouldn't be something that you would evicted for. Our city council voted that down last week. And they just said, nope, we're not going to do that. We're still going to make you for, you know, whatever stupid liability, this or that, which obviously San Diego was able to figure that out. But all they did was create a rent relief fund and threw, you know, $1 million into it. And we've got 4 million people here. So that's like less than $1 for everyone to help out with their rent. Way to go, City Council.
And yeah, I just wanted to follow up. So Will is also, they're from Anchorage as well. And they brought up the fact that Alaska has a huge indigenous population. I think like 20% of the population here is indigenous, which is, I think, the highest like per capita in the United States. And so it gets even more complicated when it comes to housing situations, because like you do have the villages, the tribally owned lands, and then the village corporation lands, and then the regional corporation lands, because the way in which I guess indigenous laws in Alaska, it's sort of like a unique experience as well, because I think we have one reservation up here, and then what indigenous folks do have up here is regional corporations and village corporations and tribal governments, and it gets very confusing very quickly. And so like on top of that, then you have, you know, a very strong state central government, and then boroughs, and then municipalities. So like I was saying earlier, it gets pretty complicated pretty fast, and depending on where that tenant is and how that tenant is organized, you know, that is really going to determine what sort of like government remedy you're going to try to seek.
Just to make it clear, we didn't win it. We're saying that's something that can be fought for.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. And then maybe our last question, which will be kind of selfishly, I'm interested in, since we are a newer tenants union, for you all who are more established, what advice would you give to like a newly formed tenants union? What did you kind of look like at pre-COVID and more normal conditions? How did you reach out to people then? Did you kind of have a different demographic in terms of who was involved in your tenants union, or yeah, who was kind of like coming to you at that time? Were they people who already appreciated a tenants union, that concept of a union, or did you have to like convince people why this is needed in your city?
I can go. I feel like advice is like, just there's going to be like lulls in organizing, but if you have people who are willing to do it anyways and get practice, like practice the kind of organizing you need to do, practice phone banking, practice text banking, practice talking to people about this. It's like a skill that has to be kind of, honed, like being able to talk to people that way if you want to be an organizer to do this kind of stuff, I think. Yeah, that's.
For us, it hasn't been something where we've had to really convince tenants. There's just such, we have kind of a thing, if you're knocking on a door, you're talking to a tenant and you're getting a lot of pushback and they're really negative, just move on to the next, because there's just so many people who have some type of need even before COVID. Whether it's bad housing conditions, accessibility, discrimination, high rents, then living on the street, and so there's not a lot of. I wish there were more of us, organizing so we could reach out to meet the need that's there.
This is Kat from the San Diego Tenants Union. I know that I mentioned this before, but I have to stress again, what basically following the money and what, if any, nonprofits have any stake. Maybe this is only towards Southern California because it's a huge tourist industry. So of course they want to gear towards people that have the money to vacation in San Diego, which will actually push people out since there's no rent control ordinance. So I think that was just a big pushback, like who has interest in developing particular areas of land and what are they doing to push people out. Displacement is a huge factor and it's not quite discussed in San Diego. And that's I just can't stress it enough. That's like a huge obstacle down here for us. And affordable housing is basically a front, just a total front, just for people to build more. And even though there's 1482, which was implemented in California, there are quote unquote low income affordable housing that falls through the cracks, and 1482 does not apply. And we're seeing more tenants, which a big number of them are being mobilized for this rent strike that received a 25% increase, 30% increase, and this is supposed to be low-income affordable housing. So, really be critical of which nonprofits and what their actual agenda is.
Oh, it looks like we have one more question that someone submitted. How have you been dealing with Airbnb? Is that something that's kind of an issue that's affected your communities? And if so, what have you found to work? Does anyone want to take that question?
Well, in LA, there was a big movement of organizations that came together to push back and limit Airbnb development and business. And we had some success in getting some ordinances in place to really limit where they could go. They couldn't be in rent controlled units. This of course was before the state rent control was passed. So it really became it was really more applicable to the rent controlled units than the non-rent controlled units, but we did get some greater protections to slow that down somewhat in the city of LA. It took about a good 4 years of work around that, specifically for Airbnb. I do want to say, LA Tenants Union, we are an organization of only tenants. We are not have any connections to any nonprofits. And so I think, as what you're kind of mentioning in San Diego, the affordable housing development and some of the nonprofits who are really accountable to foundations and or their board first have tended to be, somewhat problematic in watering down a lot of the more greater policies that we've been trying to push. And so that is constantly a challenge. Right now, they're on board with the rent strike because there's just, people really just can't pay. So that's been good that at least everybody's kind of down with the rent strike under this type of circumstance and situation. But I would call them another housing disruptor, as part of the question. The nonprofit world has been a housing disruptor in some of the stuff that we've been trying to get for greater protections for tenants here in the city.
This is Eric from the Tenants Union. I just would say that, I think there's not a ton of conversation about Airbnbs because at least I know in Sacramento, our planning department, because I sit on one of the first levels of the county planning commissions. And so they don't track them, or if they do track them, they're not transparent about it, and they don't share that information with renters or with actual homeowners. And so it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind almost. But I mean, from what the conversation, at least since COVID has happened, that I've been reading about, is that they're pissed off now because now they're thinking about turning in their Airbnbs into actual rentals because their Airbnbs are not sustainable right now in this kind of economy.
Yeah, I just feel like the situation we're in is where there are so many unused, at least in the Bay Area is how it is in San Francisco. There are so many unfilled like luxury apartments that are used to store wealth. The real estate developers basically, they store their wealth in these kind of places. Airbnb, I think, is like a symptom of that in a way, in that it's like part of that stock gets turned into Airbnb places. And these people basically own the entire state. They own all the politicians in the state. It's like they own the whole country in a way. Like it's so much like concentrated capital in land and real estate. And it's hard to address, I think, from our perspective. It's like not a thing that tenants will come to us with as a problem. We kind of organize we orient our organizing around like what the issues that tenants who come to us want to organize about. So, you don't directly see that. It's like people who were evicted 5 years ago, who are homeless now, who are affected by Airbnb. So I think it just calls to the need of like building a really well organized and militant tenant movement and workers movement that can contest this power and win back some kind of concessions from these people.
Yeah, and I would just say, here in Anchorage, and because our union's a lot newer and younger, that something like Airbnb is something that I think eventually, I think we all want to eventually figure out how to organize around that. But I know in particular, with the municipality, there's a lot of debate amongst the municipality and the state and the feds and tribal governments and corporations about land use, because even though we have a lot of land here, you can't necessarily use it for housing. And so like one particular issue I can think of is that we have this large downtown transit center. And so the municipality owns this transit center, and instead of like turning that into like affordable housing or something like that, you know, they want to turn it into a 5-star hotel, you know, and like 32 of the units will, you know, and the way that they're trying to sell it as like both progressive and like helpful is that, you know, it will increase the hotel tax revenue by like 12%, but then, you know, there's going to be 32 apartments in this building, and like living downtown in Anchorage, you know, you're talking at minimum, you know, at the low end of things is like $2,000, you know. So, you know, there's things like that that we want to try to like organize around, like, you know, the land that we can use where the city and the state can use, like, let's stop using it for tourists, because Anchorage gets something like 1 million or to 1.5 million tourists a year come through downtown Anchorage. And like, so if you're from here and you go downtown and, you know, there's unaffordable housing there and it's just a bunch of tourists, it doesn't really feel like downtown's even for people that live here. So that's like definitely something that I would say that the tenants union here, you know, hopefully when we finally go out and do things, is something that we want to organize around, you know, because I just think that's happening everywhere. And in Anchorage, you know, Anchorage isn't anywhere special. It's happening here too.
Okay, so I think we'll start closing out. And so just to close out, I want to give each of you a chance to speak in case there's anything you want to plug or share, and maybe just to leave on a positive note, maybe something that you're feeling kind of optimistic about. So we'll start with Elizabeth.
So yeah, I think that one thing that's important is for people just to organize, and it can be something very simple and starting very local, just within your own building. And if you live in a duplex, then make it be the neighbors that are on your street. You know, if anything to take out of this is form your own chapter, form your own tenant association. It may sound scary, but it's not. It's not a whole bunch of rules and regulations and bylaws. All it is, get together, have a meeting, talk about what the priorities are for you and your neighbors, decide what the top 3 are, and make a plan for how you want to tackle it. There's no right or wrong. Everybody knows a little bit of information. Everybody is their own expert around their problem, and the solution can be found out just by people working together, looking into things and sharing that information. But just, I think it's really important for people just to start, take that first step, because you're going to need that structure as we continue to move through the new normality that is coming our way.
Awesome, thank you, Elizabeth. How about Erica?
Yeah, well, I guess, I mean, something I'll say is that, like, for a long time, probably before I even really got involved with the tenants union, you know, I looked at organizing as like this labor intensive activity that's really so far from the truth that it's really not. I think organizing is more than just like, there's an organizer, right? You can be an organizer, but I really think organizing is a collective effort. And so I just to keep that in the forefront of our mind, and something I'll just share, and I guess just for other people to leave with thinking about, is that, you know, something that I experienced recently was I met a tenant through the tenants union, and we were helping her avoid an eviction. And some of us are more think about, like, we wear our hearts on our sleeves and we really care about this work that we're doing. And so for me, I was thinking more about this person and less about my own like secure housing situation. And it just so happened that at the time I had a vacant unit above me in the duplex that I was in a neighborhood that I've really rooted myself in for the last 5.5 years. And so I invited this tenant to move in with me, and it's now been kind of a nightmare. And so I think that we need to have more conversations about how to be respectful to other tenants that we're living with, and just how to work together as tenants. Because I really do see that kind of left out of the conversations that we're having. But I think it would just makes us better as tenant organizers to how to have those skills with conflict resolution and dealing with other tenants. Because often at times, I know at least with the tenants union, we don't really touch on that. You know, we don't want to get into the middle of tenant on tenant situations, but in order, I think, for us to stay in housing, we need to all work together. And so just to kind of leave that in other people's minds.
All right, thank you, Erica. How about let's go to Wolfgang.
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone. This has been really great. I guess I wanted to just plug Tanc. You can find us at baytanc.com. Basically, the model of Tanc is like anyone can start a chapter of it. So we have the system of locals where you can locals are like geographic participation within a chapter, but then we have the capacity to expand. There's an East Bay chapter. I think San Francisco chapter is like just getting off the ground right now, and I think a South Bay chapter is also like possibly being talked about. So anyone anywhere can make a Tanc chapter, and if you're interested in focusing on this kind of organizing that we do, where we are directly oriented towards organizing tenants in relation to their landlord, and then connecting everyone into a big, powerful tenants movement that will overwhelm the real estate industry and get us all social housing. I'm happy to be with you all. It's great. Just a positive note, we've like grown so much lately. It's really empowering and cool to see like so many tenants who have never done anything like this before getting together, writing letters together, send to their landlords, taking part in actions and things like that. We're going to be out on May Day, so look for our banners. And yeah, thanks everyone.
Awesome, thanks. And I don't know if we have both Rafael and Kat, but
yeah, so just want to say that the San Diego Tenants Union, we're developing leadership through education and empowerment. Everybody is a leader with the tenant union, and we have many leaders that are already taking initiative in their complexes, in their areas in San Diego. And I'm just happy to report that, we have about, I want to say including with children, because they're tenants as well, they're renters as well, about 400 members. And this is a grassroots effort, not developed by any other housing advocacy or nonprofit and all these different housing entities that really don't do anything. We really want to tackle what displacement really does and how it's a precursor to many other systems that people are fighting against. I think what sets us apart is that we're talking about the displacement. And again, it's not something that nonprofits want to touch on. So this is just going to the grassroots, boots on the ground, answering the call to many different conditions that tenants have. I mean, I see on a positive note that tenants feel that they can help themselves, and that's the true gift in being part of a tenants union. You're not looking to any other entity. It's just like we're holding landlords accountable the way that, I also film cops. We're also holding cops accountable, that we're knowing our rights. And a lot of housing entities don't take that step. So basically just leadership through empowerment.
do we still have Rafael? Does he want to say a few words before we? Okay, maybe not. All right, I don't know, Michael, if you want to say a few words before I pass it back to Jacob to close us out.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, for the Anchorage Tenants Union, for me, it's very because just 4 months ago, there was no tenants union in Alaska. And that just in the past, 3 months that, getting things off the ground has been very difficult in terms of because with anything, it's always going to be difficult. But I mean, I can already see the few conversations that you have with tenants, and they find out that we're here, they're all of them almost universally have been super excited. And they're like, I didn't even know my landlord had to get remediate mold out of my apartment, or my landlord's trying to mess me over on this utility bill. And that kind of stuff is why I personally got involved in organizing, because you know, I think we want to be of service, and I think that's why something like the Anchorage Tenants Union is absolutely vital in the city. And like on a positive note, I just think it's super cool that we have all these different tenants unions in well, not a room, but like on a Zoom call right now, kind of like, you know, talking about what each of us is doing in our areas. And then, you know, one of the things I look really forward to is that after COVID-19, you know, whenever that is, I think, you know, all of us kind of touched on it to some degree, that, you know, there's no going back to normal, and that whatever the new normal is, you know, is really going to be is going to be an effect of like what people do now. And I really hope, and I think I see it happening, is that tenants unions are really going to have like a more powerful and deep impact when it comes to like protecting tenants' rights, and like kind of what other folks are saying about not just tenants' rights, but like not just in housing, but also with like being harassed by police and discrimination and sexism and things like that. So I'm very excited, and you know, I hope we can do this stuff again in the future, because I think it's definitely beneficial and productive.
Yes, thank you to all our panelists so much for coming out, and I'll hand it back to Jacob to close us out.
Yeah, thanks. That was really great. I think it's interesting to, it's helpful for me to hear the ways that your individual situations have shaped the way that you're thinking about how you organize, which is reassuring when, you know, it feels like we don't know what we're doing in Anchorage all the time, when we're sort of discussing down, you know, rabbit hole after rabbit hole, it seems, but that we're figuring out what exactly our, you know, our neighbors need and what we need. So this was very helpful. Just as a plug for people who are watching or listening, or however you're getting this, if you live in Anchorage, I think we're going to share a link in the chat where you can get involved. It's there's also going to be a questionnaire that's going to be in there that's kind of talking about how you can join the Anchorage Tenants Union. And there's also going to be a link go up for if you are having issues and you cannot pay rent, or if you need money that should be used for food instead of rent, that there is forms that you can fill out and to give to your landlord to be able to go through the state stuff. So that's going to be up in the chat as well. And there's also some packets that the Anchorage Tenants Union has been working on. There's been a couple people who have been incredible about getting resources gathered together. So we have a couple information sheets that will be coming up in the chat as well. And I think we'll probably post these in the Facebook chat and in the description of the YouTube video as well. So if you're watching that in that format, make sure and check down there. And I think that's it. It's the attendees who came and stuck it out and asked questions. Thanks. It's really important for all of us to know what people need. I mean, I know what I need. You know what you need. I think Elizabeth had this thing that we're all experts on the problem that we're facing. So that's really important that your questions and comments reflect what you need and how we can figure that out together. So I think that's all we have. We did pretty good. 7:31, everybody. Thanks again, everybody, for coming. Anything else?
I think that's it. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Awesome.
Yeah, have a good
Have a great time. Thank you.
For hosting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Bye.